tell you that we have been videoing. You've seen us do these videotapes of the sermons every week. What we do with them is I take them home and upload them to YouTube, and then they're loaded into our account on YouTube, and it automatically connects to our church website. In fact, I had someone tell me just this week that they were traveling in Idaho with some friends. That was Mark. Mark was traveling on his trip, and his friends wanted to see him preach, so they went on the website and found his sermon. So it's really working. And if you ever have any inclination to kind of revisit the sermon, maybe you missed something and you weren't paying attention, or a point that you want to go back and look at it, we're there. We're trying to do it every week. We're doing pretty well on it. Okay. So Karen and I are getting ready to go on a trip. We're going to go to Turkey for 2 weeks at the end of this month with Jim Fleming, our favorite guide and lecturer, knows everything and anything about biblical archaeology, biblical history, and anything you might want to know. And so I thought I needed to get prepared for that trip. And I've been reading a book by David De Silva. De Silva is familiar to our curriculum people. Judy Fonda was with us at a convention in Denver, or conference where he spoke. After he spoke, we went out to talk to him, and Nancy Curran said, if I could read one book of yours, what would it be? Without hesitating, he said, it would be Honor, Patronage, Kinship, and Purity. Unlocking New Testament culture. He said, it'll change the way you read the New Testament forever. It's about understanding the culture of the times. It sounded pretty heavy to me, and having heard him speak, he's very much an academic. But he can really write and deliver really intense, deep subjects. I thought, wow, I need to read that book in preparation for Turkey. After all, I'm going to be going to Ephesus, I'm going to be going to Colossae, I'm going to be going to Cappadocia, all these areas in Turkey where Paul came through and founded churches, first century churches. If I'm going to understand what Jim has to say, I really need to read this book. So I sat down and I started reading it, and I read the first section on honor. It was about 130 pages. Honor and dishonor. Wow. And what happened was it kind of surprised me, really amazing. Turkey faded away. I didn't think about Turkey at all. I thought about you. I thought about this church. I thought about our valley. And two questions just kept popping into my head. What role, if any, does honor and dishonor play in our lives? And if there is a role, where do we find honor and dishonor today? De Silva's premise is this is first century culture, and he says later in the book, and I'll come back to it, we don't live in an honor culture, not like that. But I couldn't get away from this question about, is that really as true as it sounds? So hold those questions just a minute. I'll come back to them. But I want to talk about three things. First, I want to do a real brief rundown on what the culture at that time was like. I'm talking about the time of Jesus' life and the rest of the first century and into the second century after that, when the New Testament is being written, where all these letters are being written. What's that culture like? And what really, let me kind of flesh out, unpack a little honor and dishonor and that kind of culture. And then finally, I want to look at the impact that honor culture had on the Jewish community then, Jesus, the early Christian churches and communities. So the culture is thoroughly and completely Greco-Roman, meaning Alexander the Great came through and went all the way east to India. Greek traditions, Greek philosophy, Greek mythology, Greek values, everything just thoroughly permeated that culture in the Middle Eastern world, through Turkey and into what's now Israel. And that means it was dominated by a literate, aristocratic elite. Those were people who really mattered, really honored. And the values that were brought religious festivals. Power, money, good looks, physical fitness, courage in battle. Those are all the values that shape Jewish and shape Greek life. Overlay on that, you have the Roman occupation. We're now in the time of the Roman Empire, and the Roman military has taken over and secured our peace and stability. Oh yes, they tax us an awful lot. They're very oppressive, very arbitrary. But peace and stability is good because we're not always running off to a war or fight. So that's kind of the culture, just a little picture of that. Honor and dishonor in that culture are foundational social values. Honor can come in many ways. It can be ascribed to you. An accident of birth, you're born into the right family. Appointment to a position of power and influence. People will honor you. You can achieve it by the way you live, and by courage, by generosity, and all of those things that are valued in that culture. And let me define the other side of it, dishonor or shame. Is any behavior that results in your being seen as less than a valuable member of the community. Obviously, we need deviancy controls because some people are going to stray from the path. The Bible mentions a lot of them that were applied to the early Christians. Maligning, reproach, beatings, imprisonment, financial ruin, all those nice ways of just saying, get your act together, come on back in. Very rarely execution because the emphasis is on restoration of a person to an honorable status within the community. And this gives rise to something that De Silva calls the court of reputation. That everyone had a group of significant other people whose opinion of them mattered to them. They were willing to establish the honor and self-respect in terms of the group values, and they were willing to be evaluated by those people. To be judged worthy and asset to the group. The underlying assumption in all of this, as I began to see, is an individual's commitment to establish your honor or self-respect in terms of those group values. People wanted to be honored, they didn't want to be dishonored. So how does that impact Jesus, his followers, the early Christian church, the Jewish community? Well, Jesus comes from that Jewish community, and at that time they hadn't had any power for a number of years. They were a distinct minority subculture. Can you imagine hearing that Deuteronomy reading, sitting in this honor culture as a Jew? Oh, well, you don't participate in those religious festivals. The Roman gods were simply Greek gods with Roman names, as Mark pointed out on Thursday. And these public festivals are very important to maintaining the society and community. So you can't participate in that. And besides, what was that said? The other people will see and hear that you have such a great God, the only God that matters and is near to you. How do you think that played with the secular culture there? Not very well. And Jesus comes from that group. And our gospel reading is so interesting in that here is Jesus, and Pharisees and the scribes are engaging in what De Silva calls a social game of challenge and repulse. It was quite common and very acceptable to challenge a person's honor in a public place and to expect that person to defend their honor. We can all think back to the duels, right? Challenging your honor. I challenge you to a duel. That's one way to defend your honor. Shoot the guy who's trying to attack your honor. So here we have, ironically, the scribes and the Pharisees are the ones engaging in this social game with Jesus. He says, why do you hang around with these disciples who don't even wash their hands the right way? Well, let's be clear about this. This has nothing at all to do with hygiene. This is about ritual. We've had to wash your hands in just the right way. You've had to wash your pots in just the right way. You see, what happened here in the last 400 years or so is the scribes took what Moses was saying much earlier and said, these Ten Commandments are great moral principles, but they don't cover every possible situation. We need rules and regulations to cover every possible situation. And they called those, and it was immoral. It wasn't written down. The Mishnah, which incorporates all that, didn't get written down for another 300 years. It was oral tradition of the elders. It doesn't mean the tradition of us old people in the church. It means tradition of the ancients. They were in effect saying, this is what Moses really meant to say. He just didn't have time to get it all down in all these rules and regulations. So you hear that in Jesus' response. We follow the tradition of the elders, human traditions, but you don't honor God. Now, the lectionary sometimes does this to us. It takes a passage from the gospel and gives us pieces of it. So we skip the whole response of Jesus. What Jesus said to them had to do with something called korban, which was part of their tradition of dedicating excess monies to God. I'm dedicating my assets to God. But what Jesus is saying, you use korban to violate God's law. Because you're cleverly dedicating all your excess assets to God, and then when your parents come and say, we don't have anything, we need your help, you say to them, oh, I'm sorry, it's korban. It's over to God. I can't do anything about it. I'm still an honorable person. But you violated one of the commandments of honoring your father and mother. That's what Jesus was saying to them. He showed them how this rigid adherence to their human tradition caused them to disobey God's law. So he's got the reply to them. It says basically, you're not honorable. Your honor is at stake because of what you're doing and following these human traditions. And that would have been fine if he stopped right there, but of course he didn't. I said this is what was done in a public place. So he turns to the crowd and says something that Barclay, the Scottish theologian, says probably was the most revolutionary statement he made at the time. He said, nothing that goes into you can be defiled. What defiles a person is what comes out of their heart. He was trampling on centuries of Jewish tradition, all these dietary laws and everything. Jesus was saying, nothing is unclean for you to eat, but what comes out of their heart. He's redefining honor and dishonor for the Jewish people. It's not in following your human traditions, your ritual acts, but it's in your human actions that you are honored or dishonored, or clean or defiled. And he's also modeling a Christian version of the repose. We've replaced the dual. But Peter reminds us that we should reflect to the outside world the values and virtues of the Christian belief. He writes, conduct yourself honorably among the Gentiles, so that though they malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge. So you see how Jesus was caught up in this honor. What about the early Christian communities? Jesus' teachings and group values were in direct conflict with all of those Greek values, weren't they? Pagan gods in public life. Roman peace is the best we can do here. Boundaries between Jews and Gentiles. So the Christian community was a lot like the Jewish community that it grows out of. Even the Gentiles. The deviancy and controls were employed against them because they weren't living up to the honorable values of the secular culture, and they were actually teaching different values. What an enormous challenge they had. And this is where the New Testament helps us so much. They were defining honor and dishonor in Christian terms. They had to help It's the members resist the outside pressures. Think of when you're reading some of these letters of Paul, these themes. Keep the old habits out. Everybody wants to bring their old habits right into the church, right? Okay, I get the seat of honor in the banquet, right? I'm better. This group over here is better, more valuable than you. Jesus was saying, absolutely not. Paul was saying, absolutely not. He's warning them about, even James, in a different part, warns them about favoring people over other people, treating people unequally. So what exactly did that look like? Just real quickly here. Servanthood is the foundation of the whole thing. Mark writes later, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus boiled it down for us, didn't he? Love God and love your neighbor, as you said. Servanthood is a given. Active participation in the community of faith is normative. Just from James today. He gave us birth by the word of truth so that we can become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Therefore, rid yourself of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your soul. And here's the one that got me into this sermon, because I get a chance to kind of say, okay, I'll preach that Sunday because I think I can use this one. James, I saw this. But be doers of the word and not merely hearers, they will be blessed in their doing. Diaconal sermons, mission trips, service to the world. I'll get these people up off their butts and out that door. And I'm reading this in the context of what the psalmist said. I thought, wow, that's part of it. But that's a really narrow interpretation of that. It's so much broader than that. It's calling us active participation in the community of faith. Be doers of the word, not merely hearers. I love what he says about looking in the mirror. And I think of it this way. Remember, he said you look in the mirror, you know what you look like, and walk away, and you don't remember what you look like. You can sit right here and listen to me preach. Walk out that door and forget every bit of it. Or Mark or anybody. And that's not what James is saying. It's be doers, be active participants. Fellowship in the community is expected. With humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another, Paul writes in Ephesians. And then in Galatians, he brings in the idea of accountability. That's a given. Accountable for one another and for our own actions. My friends, if anyone is detected in a transgression, you who have received the Spirit should restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. You see, the Christian definition of deviancy control is different than the secular definition. We'll whip this guy back into shape and bring him back in. No, we're to restore one another in the spirit of gentleness. And James writes, my brothers and sisters, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and is brought back by another, you should know that whoever brings back a sinner from wandering will save the sinner's soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. Let me encourage you to read the whole book of James. It'll take you 5 minutes. It's only about 4 or 5 pages, and half of the page in my Bible is taken out in footnotes. It's only 5 chapters. Or read any of the epistles with that lens of we're forming a new community, and this is what the community is supposed to look like. But then finally, and most importantly, the church had to establish a new court of reputation. The one that really matters, and that's God's evaluation. So where are we today? Let's come back to the questions. So, as I said, just we're not a culture of honor. You've got to go to the Middle East and the Orient to find a culture of honor like that. Is that true? He says also very perceptively, individualism, materialism, pluralism are all modern factors that push back against honor. temporary sense, means of motivated behavior. And let's say it, I forgot to say it in Baylor, the majority of culture neither shares nor supports our primary Christian values. We think this, some people say, oh, this is a Christian country. But do you really believe that the majority of culture or secular culture supports what we're doing? So we live in very similar times, I think. And we have the same challenges. He's right, but I think honor and dishonor do matter. In fact, I think you all have multiple courts of reputation, don't you? You operate in those. And I'm not saying that's even bad. Your family, you want to behave in a fashion that you're seen as a valued member of the family and not a disruption. Your workplace, would you submit to the evaluation of how your worth to the group is in your workplace? And it matters and influence your behavior? Well, I hope so. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be employed there that long. So we will operate in all these multiple courts of honor, courts of reputation. So where is honor and dishonor found in your life, and what are your courts of reputation? Are there places where evaluation of your value of the group matters to you? I think yes. And individualism is modern law. Individualism, my life is my life, it doesn't, what I do, it doesn't matter. We all impact other people. And I don't think there's anybody in this room that I know of that behaves in a fashion that says, however I impact that person doesn't matter to me. Sure it does. It's just the silver name that I won't second that. It's a modern lie. So here's our challenge. As a body of Christians, to build a strong community where it encourages the pursuits of God's value, and to free us from needing to seek honor or dishonor in those secular places solely. What is the primary court of reputation? 3 questions. Who's the Chief Justice? Who's the defense attorney? And where is the jury? Any answers to that? God is the Chief Justice. It's His evaluation that ultimately matters. Jesus is our defense attorney. Will Jesus be there and say, I know this person, or say, I don't know you? The author of Hebrews writes that a great high priest who has suffered every temptation that we have and will be standing at the throne of glory when we arrive there to give witness to us. And finally, the jury. Any guesses on the jury? Look to your right and left. This is the community. I come back to that underlying assumption, an individual commitment to seek honor and self-respect in the values of the group. Are you committed to do that in Transfiguration? Amen.
Let us stand. We join together in confessing the faith of the Holy Christian Church. We are on page 7 in our bulletin, and we join together in the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, Father